Well, the UConn Husky men's basketball team have won back-to-back national titles, and while the Husky football team might not competing for a national championship this year, things should get a lot better than the way they looked in 2023. Jim Morris had some really good success with this program, and last year just didn't go as planned. Well, the schedule is very manageable, and they got a pretty solid roster here with the UConn Huskies in 2024. So can this be a Husky team? After their manageable schedule, can they push towards a bowl game this season? You're about to find out what I think here in this video. What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. I want to welcome you to my channel. Of course, welcome you back to Prediction Seasons, where I predict all 134 FBS level college football teams. Guys, I believe we have 20 left to go, which is absolutely crazy. Or if not, we're really, really close to that 20 mark, meaning however many we have left, we are so close to being done with prediction season. I want to thank you guys so much for your support of prediction season and of my channel. It's just meant a lot to me. Continue to help support the channel by interacting with it in any way you can. I want to thank you again for watching this video and all my other videos. If you're as big of a college football nerd as I am and you want to hear what I have to say during the season, subscribe and ring the bell so you know when all of my videos get uploaded during the 2024-2025 college football season. Like, comment, share, and again, any other way you interact with the channel helps to support it, which does mean a lot to me. But let's dive on in now to talking about UConn in 2024. Well, how do we do that? I'm going to tell you. We're going to take a deep dive into the team's offense, into the defense, and at the end of the video, we're going to go through the UConn Husky game-by-game schedule, and we'll give it a preview and prediction. So, let's dive on into UConn. But before we do that, I do have a couple more things that I would like to tell all of you fine people out there, because right over here will be the stats a team put up either offensively or defensively last season. And of course, for your viewing pleasure, right down there below the team's logo, I have went ahead and put the team's coaching staff. Let's now talk about Jim Mora's UConn Huskies here in 2024. Let's start out by talking about the quarterback position. Now, look, the offense overall not that great last season, and it dealt with a lot of injuries and inconsistencies within the offense last season. You are losing your primary starting quarterback from last year, though. Taquan Roberson is off and is transferred to yet another new program. He was a former Penn State Nittany Lion, decided to transfer over here with the UConn Huskies, and now he is going over back to the Power 4 with the Kansas State Wildcats, and Zion Turner has entered the portal as well. He only threw 5 passes last year, but played a bigger role with this team in 2022. Taquan Roberson, however, you heard me mention, was the primary starter last season. 2,075 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions on 58% completion percentage last season. Also had 120 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So overall, when you're talking about Roberson, a fairly solid player at the quarterback position, but you are going to see him go here in 2024. So who is your starting quarterback going to be this year? Well, I think it's going to be one of these two guys you see here. Joseph Fagnano, who had 173 yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick, on 51% completion percentage. He only threw 35 passes last year. I don't really think he's going to end up being that starter this year. I think it's going to be a former Oklahoma and most recently former Wisconsin Badger. Coming in from the portal is Nick Evers. Now, he has not had a lot of playing experience in college at all. In fact, when you take a look at his stats here, just 1 pass attempt throughout his entire career. That was back in 2022 when he was with the Oklahoma Sooners. He threw a pass in the 49-0 beatdown that Oklahoma suffered against Texas that season. But when you take a look at what Nick Evers was recruited as, he was a 3-star recruit, and while that isn't super notable or super high, he does bring some really good intangibles, some really good things coming into this UConn program. I think he's going to end up being that starting quarterback for him, and honestly, again, pretty big mystery because you don't know kind of what you're going to get from Nick Evers because you haven't seen him play at the collegiate level. Granted, he was playing at some Power 4 schools, but from what I understand, they really like everything they've seen with him so far. He should be the starting quarterback this year and should provide some solid quarterback play for the Husky offense in 2024. But okay, now you got to talk about the weapons. What does UConn lose out of the skill position room? Well, in terms of the running back room, they lose some pretty darn good ones. Devontae Houston is going to be gone, 161 yards for him last season. You also lose a couple other guys such as Jalen Mitchell and Brian Bruton. Both of those guys were sort of depth pieces in that role last season. So Houston, the more notable piece there, as again, only 4 Huskies, I don't think I've said this yet actually, only 4 Huskies got over 120 rushing yards last year. Roberson was one of them, gone out of the quarterback room. Houston, another one, gone out of the running back room. But hey, good news for this program is you do return your top 2 leading rushers from a season ago. Cam Edwards had 618 yards and 4 touchdowns. Well, you get him back, and Victor Rosa, 550 yards and 3 touchdowns. Both of them had fairly similar number of carries and right around the yards per carry mark. So both of those guys will play big roles in the running back room this season, much like they did last year. And you get a couple transfers like Mel Brown and Darrell Robinson to try to bulk up this running back room here in 2024. Wide receiver room, well, you got to talk about Cam Ross, who was a force in the wide receiver room last season. 552 yards, 2 touchdowns on 44 catches. He was a really, really good wide receiver that obviously will be missed here in 2024. He has entered the transfer portal, and a couple other guys have graduated. Jordan Porter and Kevin Clarcius, both of those guys will no longer be playing Husky football here in 2024. In fact, they won't be playing any football. No more eligibility for them. They have since graduated. And you got to talk about Justin Jolly as well. The tight end last season was the team's leading receiver, had a team high in catches with 56 of them, 578 yards, 2 touchdowns last season, and he is going to go over and play some Power 4 football this year. He is now with the NC State Wolfpack, will be a big part in their tight end room. So what does the pass catching room look like for UConn this upcoming season? Well, Brett Buckman is still coming back. Good solid piece in the wide receiver room last year, 488 yards and 2 touchdowns on 46 catches. He's probably going to end up being the leading receiver for Nick Evers or whoever happens to start at quarterback in the UConn Husky company here in 2024. Kylish Hicks and Zachary Girardi are also names that return, but you do get some very, and I mean very talented pieces in through the transfer portal. TJ Sheffield is coming over from Purdue, and I think he's going to be a great weapon here for this team. Skylar Bell is coming into this program as well. He follows Nick Evers, my apologies, over from Wisconsin. And then you do get another transfer in there as well in Josiah Gathings, who was at Akron last season. So all three very talented transfers coming in, and all three of them, I think, are going to see some very significant playing time, especially that of Sheffield and Bell. No notable transfers, though, in the tight end room, so you're going to rely on a bunch of returners. Lewis Hanson, Nick Harris, and Alex Honig all come back in the tight end room. Offensive line, let's talk about it. Noel Afori Nyadu, and apologies if I pronounced that last name wrong. He is gone due to graduation, as well as Christian Haynes, two guys that saw some starting minutes here on the offensive line last season. And then gone through the transfer portal is a guy by the name of Yakiri Walker. So you do lose some pretty solid pieces off the offensive line, too deep from last season, but a combination of these 7 guys should be your starting offensive line here in 2024, including the transfer Wes Ho. You do get Valentin Sen, Ben Morosky, Chase Lunt, Christopher Fortin, Kyle Jurgens, and Jack Stewart coming back to the offensive line room. So overall, when you talk about the offense here for Jim Mora and company, if Nick Evers can provide just solid quarterback play, I think you know your run game is going to be pretty solid. And honestly, even though the statistics say it wasn't that great last season, they only averaged 136 yards per game. 4.1 yards per carry, though, is not a bad number. You get two guys that averaged 5 yards per carry last season. Depending on what, again, Nick Evers can give you at the quarterback position, I think he's going to have some really good weapons here in this wide receiver room. Buckman, Sheffield, Bell, some of the tight ends could take a step up here as well. And if the offensive line can continue its play from last season, I mean, they only allowed 12 sacks last year. They threw the ball almost as often as they ran it. So the offensive line really wasn't the problem here. It's just inconsistency with the quarterback play, not generating enough offense when needed. If this team and if Nick Evers provides even 2,500 yards and 20 touchdowns, I mean, this is a UConn offense that should see massive improvement here in 2024. But when you take a look at the defensive side of the ball, yeah, you could definitely argue that the defense held UConn back from a couple of wins last season. Again, they only went 3-9, but there were a lot of close games in there for the Huskies last year. Well, they lose some really, really good defensive pieces to the NFL. I'll talk about those when we get there, but we'll talk about one right now because he comes off the defensive line. Eric Watts is gone off to play in the league. Sorry, just a formatting thing I had to fix there. Let's look at the stat line for Watts last season as soon as I am able to find it. Here it is, 34 tackles, 2 sacks, and a pass defended last season. Yeah, while the stat line doesn't speak volumes, I mean, if you just watched the UConn football game last year, you know how big of an impact he had on this defense, and obviously, he earned his right to go play in the NFL. He got signed by a team, I do believe, if not got invited to do a couple of mini camps. Regardless, you could definitely see him playing on Sundays. Colin McCarth and Rashawn Wilkins are a couple names that do leave this team due to graduation, and Carter Hooper, a guy who also had double-digit tackles last year along with McCarth and Wilkins, has entered the transfer portal, and he has since graduated. Wilkins had 12 tackles last year, and McCarthy, that should be McCarthy, Had 14 tackles last season. So there you go, fix the spelling change. But that's all you lost here off the defensive front. So who all comes back? Well, you do get your leading tackler, a couple of your leading tacklers actually among defensive linemen back. That's Price Yates and Jelani Stafford. Both of those guys were top 10 tacklers for the team last year. 4.5 sacks for Yates, led the Husky defense last season. You also get Dalmont Gordine, who had 3 sacks last year. That was second on the team, and third was Eric Watts, who again is gone, no longer playing football for the Huskies here in 2024. Langston Hardy and Donovan Branch also come back, while Jaden Simon and Jack Barton, couple transfers coming in, could have a pretty solid defensive front for the Huskies this season, even with all the production that you do lose. But you take two really big hits out of this linebacker room because Jackson Mitchell is going to be gone. Your leading tackler last year. And anytime you lose your leading tackler, that's a huge loss to the defense. But Jackson Mitchell was the guy who also broke triple digits last year. 113 tackles, 1 sack, 1 pass defended. Did have an interception in there as well. So that's a big loss. And then Noah Plack Talarico. A lot of people just call him Noah Plack. Don't necessarily include the Talarico name. But again, still technically part of his name. So I went and put it on there, but he, again, another big loss here. Fourth leading tackler with 49 tackles, had half a sack. Again, just another very sizable loss in this linebacker room. So who does come back? Well, you do get Tui Faumuina Brown. Again, hopefully said that name right. Langston Hardy, who is listed there twice. Well, there you go. I think Langston Hardy going to be such a big piece of this defense, at least stepping up from his role last year. That I listed them twice. Don't worry, I went ahead and fixed that. So you do get Faumuina Brown coming back, as well as Alfred Che, who comes back to the linebacker room. But after losing Mitchell and Plack, you're going to need some guys to step up in this room. And whether that are some returners like Che, among other names you could have mentioned, there are a couple portal pieces that are going to play a lot of big minutes. Julian Simon and Aaron Key both come in from other programs that probably will end up seeing some starting minutes, if not at the very least, some really solid second string minutes here out of this linebacker room. If you want some other guys that could be there, Langston Hardy can play both on the defensive line and as a linebacker. He's kind of listed in both on the RLAT's depth chart, so I think that's probably why I had him listed twice. No, there are not two Langston Hardys. It's just a guy that can definitely play on the defensive front coming off the edge, or kind of in that slot linebacker position, maybe even as the middle linebacker. You do also have Amir Renwick coming back, and again, a couple other names you could put in this linebacking fray. Defensive backs, let's run through them really quickly. You lose some good ones out of the cornerback room to the transfer portal. Mumu bin Wahad is gone. A really good player for this defense last year. 3 pass defended, 34 tackles, a sack, and a pick. And Armani Archie will also be leaving this cornerback room as well. He had 12 tackles in the pass defended last season, but probably the biggest loss in your defensive back room is Chris Sheeran. He had 36 tackles, 3 pass defended, and led the team with 2 interceptions last season. So you lose all 3 of those guys to the portal. Well, who all comes back? Cornerback room, you do get 1 portal piece coming in Reggie Ackles, but other than that, it's a lot of returners. Malcolm Bell is back. He had 4 passes defended, which I believe was the leader on the team last season. Yes, it was. Now that I'm looking at the stat sheet, Isaiah Davis and Damon Brinson are all coming back, as well as Ronte Jones, Malik Dixon-Williams, Lee Millette, however you pronounce that last name, and Stan Cross in the safety room, as well as Jarvarius Sims that enters through the transfer portal. And hey, kickers are people too. We got to show them some love. Primary punter and George Caratan is gone due to graduation, and Joe McFadden leaves the kicking room through the transfer portal. So you dive into the portal to replace the punter and kicker. Connor Stutz is in as the punter, and Chris Freeman is in as the kicker. Again, both guys come in through the transfer portal. So overall, when you talk about what UConn has on the defensive front this year, I think it's a little tough to see improvement, at least on paper. Now, things could very well change, and the philosophies and everything could get better for this UConn defense this season, but just based off of what they lost, when you lose some really talented players like Watts and Mitchell and Plack and Archie and Sheeran, it's going to be pretty hard to replace a lot of that production. However, again, a lot of good players still here. I think UConn did pretty well from themselves in the transfer portal, and overall, I definitely think this defense, at the very least, takes a tiny step in the right direction. It might not be super substantial, but I do think there are enough pieces here to see some improvement if that is indeed what happens with Husky defense here in 2024. You go ahead and take a look at the UConn schedule, and one thing I will point out as soon as the slide changes, there it goes. You take a look there from week 4 on to week 10. 6 straight home games with a bye week sandwiched right in between there. You won't see any other schedule like it here in college football. And for the most part, you do have some favorable matchups here on the schedule. I'll talk to you about them in just a little bit. Any game at home is going to be underlined, while any game on the road is in italics or that slanted text. Any game you see in green is a game that I think the Huskies are going to win pretty easily, while any game in yellow is a close competitive game, but I still see the Huskies being able to win. Anyone in red is a loss, and I think my apologies. The first three games on this schedule are pretty easy to predict. Even though Maryland is losing a lot of pieces off of last year, both offensively and defensively, the defense should continue to, while it might take a step back, it'll be sort of close to where it was last season. And they are bringing in some pretty talented pieces through the portal on offense to replace what they lost. I don't think UConn's going to go on the road and beat Maryland, so UConn picks up that loss there in week 1. They should be able to beat Merrimack in week 2, and then they will lose to Duke there in week 3. I think a lot of people are counting Duke out this year, even though Mike Elko, the head coach, is gone, even though Riley Leonard, the quarterback, is gone. Some other really good offensive and defensive pieces. Malik Murphy is in. You get Manny Diaz in. I think this is still going to be a pretty solid Duke team, and UConn is going to lose that one there on the road. So 1 and 2 to begin the season. I think those 3 games are pretty easy to predict for this UConn schedule. I don't really see any sort of way, unless they happen to really pull off a huge upset against Maryland there in week 1. I don't really see a way that they don't go 1 and 2 throughout those first 3 games. So then you dive on into this lengthy homestand, which UConn, we all know, is going to be very, very appreciative to have. But how well do they do in it? Well, let's find out. Road game against the FAU Owls. I think they lose this one. Tom Herman's Owls are going to be a lot better this season. They dealt with some inconsistency issues at the quarterback position last year. And even though, yes, there still is some pretty good talent leaving this team through the transfer portal. I mean, you get Cam Fancher in at quarterback. I think he's going to be able to turn it around from where he was at Marshall last year. Really good talented pieces coming at the wide receiver room. The defense loaded up on depth through the portal, as well as got some really good returners. FAU just is supposed to be a lot better this season, and I think they will be. I think UConn loses that one there at home. But these next 2 matchups, very, very favorable for UConn. They can easily win both of these, and I got them beating the Buffalo Bulls here. This is a Buffalo team that, again, I've talked about it in a lot of videos prior. I'm just not super high on. They did not fare super well last year, and they're losing their starting quarterback, Cole Snyder, to another MAC team in Eastern Michigan. Buffalo is also losing a lot of other talent, and while they bring in a couple good wide receiver transfers and some defensive pieces here and there that are probably going to end up help fill the gaps of what that team lost, I just don't see things clicking well for Buffalo this year, and that's a win for the UConn Huskies, making them 2 and 3 on the college football season. Hey, I said both of these games are very winnable, and I think they win both of them. But Buffalo could be one of the worst teams in the Mid-American Conference this season. I think the same about Temple when you talk in terms of the American Athletic Conference. Temple did not have a lot going for him last year, and much to the same thing that I just talked about with Buffalo, not a very good team last year that lost their starting quarterback. Temple is the exact same way, and EJ Warner and Cole Snyder are pretty comparable in the fact that they played pretty well for their respective teams. It was just the team around them that didn't really have the talent, the fight, the drive, whatever else it is you want to say, to be able to pull out some wins there. So, again, losing EJ Warner, he's going over to Rice. I think that's a really big loss for Temple, really big loss offensively. And again, I just don't see Temple being that great this season. So that's a win for UConn. So look at that. The Huskies 3 and 3 here. They enter their first bye week of the college football season, and then you get another Power 4 side in the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. And even though this game at home, and definitely you build some momentum throughout those first 2 games, Wake Forest is going to be a lot bigger of a challenge than Buffalo, than Temple. And even though they're probably not as big of a challenge as what FAU, Duke, or Maryland's going to be able to throw at you, they are challenging enough to where I don't think UConn is going to be able to win this game. Wake Forest has still got some really, really good pieces, bringing in some good talent through the transfer portal, and I think overall UConn's going to end up dropping that one there to Wake Forest, and I think they dropped this one to Rice as well. Rice, as I just talked about a little bit ago, is getting EJ Warner, who was a bright spot in a just shadow of darkness for Temple last season. Again, it just seemed like not a whole lot of things went right for the Temple Owls last year. Now for the Rice Owls, so hey, I don't think I've pointed this out, but EJ Warner sticking with the same nickname there, goes from Temple over to Rice, keeps the Owl nickname. He's going to perform really well for this Rice team that returns a ton of defensive talent, and they will beat UConn there in week 9. However, UConn does get win number 4 of the college football season. Apparently they don't. They do not get win number 4. There you go. I fixed it so that UConn is now beating Georgia State because I think the floor is just going to fall out for the Panthers this year. I mean, they lost a ton last season. They have a new head coach this year now. All of a sudden, a new formula. They lose a lot of talent. And look, that's not to say that Georgia State is still devoid of talent. I mean, they have Zach Gibson coming in at quarterback as well as DJ Riles, a couple of guys that have some good playing experience. They're still bringing in some pretty good transfers, and overall, they could be pretty competitive in the Sun Belt Conference. Georgia State, under their old head coach, usually was a pretty solidly competitive team. They were going to fight, scratch and claw. I just don't see things getting put together that well for Georgia State this year, and I think UConn is a team that's going to see their improvements from last season. That is a win against the Georgia State Panthers, and then you got to go on the road to play UAB. And look, UAB, much like UConn, is going to see their improvements this year, and I think UAB has a little more talent to go around. They too are bringing in a lot of talented pieces through the transfer portal and sort of rebuilding a couple of positions here on this team. Okay, not necessarily a couple of positions, but they are bringing in some really, really good talent to replace a lot of the talent that they did lose. Jacob Zeno is back at quarterback along with some really good weapons. I just don't think UConn's going to pick up that road win against the Blazers, nor after their second bye week do I think they're going to get a win against the Syracuse Orange, taking them out of bowl contention. Unfortunately, Syracuse is going to be a pretty solid team this year. Grayson McCall is in. Sorry, not Grayson McCall. What the heck am I thinking? Kyle McCord. I don't know how I got those two confused, but Kyle McCord is in for the Syracuse Orange. A lot of good talent around him, and the Orange usually have some pretty good defensive backs. They'll beat UConn, but UConn will go on the road, and again, I just have another game that they should win. My apologies here for these errors, but they will be beating the UMass Minutemen this season. UMass lost a lot of really good talent last year, and even though, or I should say, coming into this year from last year, and even though it feels like that's a program that's starting to trend in the right direction under Don Brown, I think UConn's a better team than UMass this year. I think they get that road win, marking their first and only road win of the college football season, just because they have so many home games. And 5-7 is what I got for UConn this year. So close to a bowl game, and they can get there. If things with FAU don't pan out, that can be a win. If things with Rice don't pan out, that can be a win. If things with Wake Forest or Maryland don't pan out, they can pull off a win against a Power 4 program. I think UConn's got a lot of really solid pieces here. Again, it depends on what Nick Evers gives you at the quarterback position, but overall, the Huskies improve from last year, but fall just short of a postseason berth. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder. And in my next video, we'll talk about the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. Goodbye.